guys, welcome back to another SuzBub video. This one's a little different. You're gonna watch me decorate a 3-story apartment in Sims. But what I wanted to do was do like an audio only Q&A. So a little while back I asked you guys to submit any questions that you had about herpes and sensuality and anything related to what I discuss. And if you don't know what I discuss, you can look at my other videos on this channel. You can find me at SuzBub on TikTok, SuzBub with an S on Instagram. I have recently started a Twitch channel, also SuzBub with an S, but haven't had too much upload activity there yet. But here we are. So I'm just going to get right into the questions because I have 43 questions and I didn't organize them in any particular way. I'm literally just going to go in order and answer them one by one. They'll all be anonymous. So if you submitted a question, don't worry. I will not say your name or any names that you might have mentioned. And let's just get right to it. First question is one that I get a lot, and it's how to disclose to a new partner or when, and if through text or in person. This is probably the most common question that I get in relation to herpes. And I think that it's understandable for us to worry about and think about like the timing of such things. The way that I usually go about this and like advise people to go about this is not going to be a simple black and white answer because I think it so depends on the situation, right? So for me, I've done it like in all kinds of ways, all kinds of timing. I've done it through text. I've done it in person. I've done it over the phone. I've done it on FaceTime. And I've done it right away. I've done it after a date or two. I've done it during a date. So I feel like I've experienced it all in my 5 years of having it. First thing I want to say is that if someone is going to be cool with it, it's not going to matter how or when you do it. I think that's an important piece that would help us all to like remind ourselves. If someone isn't going to be cool with it, it's not going to matter when or how you do it. So that kind of takes some of the pressure off of it because you can like decide for yourself what feels most comfortable. And sometimes it depends on like what you're looking for, right? So if you are looking for something casual and you connect with a potential partner, it's a little more superficial. You're not really going to get to know them the same way. And this is like, you can look for a casual connection that has more depth, but I'm talking like you're just kind of looking to have fun physically. So in a situation like that, you might get into that conversation sooner, right? And a thing that like I would recommend is making it, or that you can do anyways, is making it a two-way conversation. Like if you and this person are looking to hook up and like that's kind of the, intention, it can be like, so what's like your situation? When were you last tested? Here's my situation, So that's like one way you could go about it. I have dropped it in conversation when it just sort of felt relevant. Sometimes I'm like witty about it. Sometimes I approach it more, I don't know, just like the usual way that I say it. And I'm sure someone's going to ask in one of the questions like how I disclose, but might as well go over it now. The way that I usually say it is just like, hey, so like before we go there, just so you know, like I have herpes. Let me know if you have any questions about that. It's super common, easy to work with, etc. Like that's kind of what I do, and I've done variations of that. I just disclosed to someone like the other day, and I was literally just like, so I have herpes. Like, what do you think about that? Like that's all I said. And it turned out the person has herpes orally. And I've seen so many of you comment this because it's like you encounter something like that and you're like, were you going to mention it to me? Do you know that you can transmit it below when you have it orally? So then we're kind of in the same boat because I'm a risk to this person, potential risk, quote unquote risk, but they're also a quote unquote risk to me if we don't have the same type, right? Although HSV2 gives you a little bit of protection apparently against HSV1 if you don't already have it. Most of us already have HSV1. Surprisingly, for some reason, it doesn't work the other way. Like already having HSV1 doesn't give you much more protection against HSV2. I don't really know why that is, but it must give you a little bit because they're so similar, right? So yeah, if you're looking at a casual situation, you might disclose quickly. Text or in person or FaceTime or however is totally up to you. I think like early on it was easier in text because when I was still kind of grappling with it, I had a harder time talking about it and saying it in person and like verbally. However, sometimes that can also humanize it, right? Like you can have an instant conversation around it, like a live conversation, and gauge how the person takes it and ask questions or answer questions. Sometimes, often, there's a little bit of education that comes into it. For me, like if they don't know much about it, which most people don't know a ton about it, I'll just sort of explain, things to them, like how often I get flare-ups, like how it actually works, how we might approach, protection or like ways of protecting them or whatever. But I've had people just be like, cool, thanks for telling me, like, and they're really appreciative for the honesty. I've disclosed it on the street before getting into an Uber with a potential partner, which was a bit of a risk because I was like, they're either going to get in my Uber or not. And they did. And she worked in the healthcare like realm. So she was like, I know about it. It doesn't worry me. And had a really nice night, So yeah, it's so up to you. And like, if you want to date seriously or you're looking for a relationship, then you might want to like take more time to gauge whether you and this person have a connection or have potential. Like you might still do this for a casual connection too. So sometimes you might have a few, phone conversations first, or like a date or two first, or just like text for a couple weeks first. Like I know that there's this kind of fear and worry for people that you are leading someone on by not telling them, but you're not. If this is a deal breaker for somebody, then they can be asking that first thing, right? Then they should come into the conversation being like, do you have an STI? Because that's always going to be a question mark with every partner until you get to that situation where you're like about to be intimate and you either have the conversation or you don't. And a lot of people never even approach that conversation. They don't ask each other like what their status is or when they've been tested or whatever. And if you're using like protection and stuff, like it's not always a point of conversation for people because they're like, well, I'm going to protect myself anyways. But as we know, like we can still contract things and transmit things through like foreplay, right? So if it is that big of a deal breaker for somebody, my view on it is like, then they should be coming in hot asking the question, right? So if they were to get upset later that I didn't tell them first thing, I would just be like, goodbye, I'm so much more than this virus. Like there's also other things that we don't disclose to partners right away that aren't relevant right away, but could be a big deal, right? Like maybe it's your financial situation. Maybe it's maybe you have something in your history that's kind of troubling. Maybe you don't have your own place or you don't have a car. Like there's various things that people look for and want from one another for various purposes and reasons that, you're not like spilling all of that immediately upon matching. So I would say test out different things and figure out what feels best for you. And sometimes it's just going to be contextual. Some people I do it sooner with, some people I do it later with. Sometimes I almost feel like I can gauge how someone might take it or react. And yeah, I've also done it like the moment I match with people. I've had it in my dating bio before. So there's all kinds of ways to go about it, and you can just kind of test and see. And that one took up like 10 minutes. Let me have a sip of water here. So the next question is, besides avoiding sex during an outbreak, what are other safety measures to follow, especially during oral sex? Okay, so like the best thing that you can do to prevent transmission for your partner is avoid contact with that specific area when you feel like a flare-up is coming on, and especially during a flare-up. Now listen, I have heard like more often than you'd think of people in relationships or situationships, whatever, where the partner doesn't mind that they're having a flare-up. They're not scared of it. They're not worried about it. They're not worried about getting it. So like you can still do that, but if you want to reduce the risk of transmitting to your partner, I wouldn't recommend it. Depending on what your flare-ups are like, it might also be uncomfortable. It would be like, you know, if you have a cold sore, you have an oral herpes flare-up, you probably don't want to make out. You probably wouldn't kiss, and, you know, would wait until it passes or subsides. Sometimes I can feel like a flare-up is going to happen. It's funny because I have that right now. So literally one of my labia majora, my right one, hold on, I just got a notification. Okay. My right one, the skin on it feels a little bit like, I always say it feels like if you've had your hair in like tied back in a bun or a ponytail all day, like a tight bun. You know how like your scalp feels really sensitive after? That's what it feels like. And I know for me, like I've come to learn that that is a telltale sign of a flare-up trying to come, or I'm like shedding right now, right? And asymptomatic shedding or shedding, I mean, shedding happens, like viral shedding happens during the flare-up and as the flare-up's coming up. Asymptomatic shedding just means you don't know what's happening. You can't feel it. So technically this wouldn't be asymptomatic because I can feel a symptom. But it's like I'm not having a full flare-up, right? There's no blister there. But like on a day like today, I would abstain or take my antiviral because something is brewing. And like you could shed for like a few hours or a day without a flare-up happening. So this could pass, for example, after today and nothing came up. But I like know my body well enough now to know that this is like potential. I wouldn't interact with someone with that spot, you know. And I actually have a date tonight, so I will not be going there, you know. But in terms of, okay, so first and best safety measures to avoid sex during an outbreak or contact with that area, right? Depends where you get it. And then other safety measures to follow, like you can't, so yeah, the secondary thing is sort of like once you learn what your prodrome symptoms are or shedding symptoms, prodrome just means like the symptoms that happen before the initial thing. So if you are getting sick, sometimes a prodrome symptom is like a scratchy throat. That's a prodrome symptom. So you could say that this skin sensation that I'm having on my pussy is a prodrome symptom. I don't know what words I can say on YouTube, so if I say some funny phrases or terms for things, it's because I'm so used to censoring on TikTok and such. But so yeah, when you feel like you may be getting a flare-up or are shedding, that is also a good time to avoid activity. Like I would, for example, wait through today, maybe give it like a day or two. If I feel nothing and a flare-up never came, then I'm going to assume I'm good. Other than that, obviously protection is going to do a lot. Like, yes, people can still get herpes with protection. It depends on where you get your flare-ups. If you get your flare-ups outside of where a barrier will protect, then it could still come into contact. So say you get it like on your lower stomach, for example, a condom is not necessarily going to help, right? But protection is a big help. Like if you look up the rates of transmission with condom use, I think they're like 1% or something like that. But don't quote me on it. Look it up for yourself. Another one is taking daily antivirals. So you can take Valtrex or acyclovir, whatever you have accessible to you, of the herpes antivirals. Fun fact, they're also prescribed to people with shingles, to people with oral herpes, because it's all the same shit. It's like just different strains, and works the same. So what the antivirals do is, for the most part, they help suppress flare-ups and also shedding episodes. So if you're worried about like asymptomatic shedding or shedding outside of flare-ups, the antivirals reduce that by something like 80%, I believe. When you look up how much they reduce transmission rates, I think it's like 50%. So that doesn't always give people much comfort, although that's a huge reduction. But like it reduces the shedding by almost, like 80%. So that's really good. So you can also be on daily antivirals. If you're on daily antivirals plus you're using protection, there is like almost like zero chance in my mind that your partner would get it. Even without protection, antivirals alone, it's going to be like very low chance, just like with, without antivirals and protection alone, it's going to be a low chance. And without protection and antivirals alone, it's going to be a low chance. So that really helps. Now, this person was asking especially with regards to oral sex. Now, if you have it genitally, especially type 2, it very rarely infects the mouth. So I don't tend to worry about that, like, unless my partner's worried. But I usually tell partners, like, the risk is extremely low for them performing on me, because the chance that they'll get HSV2 orally is very, very low, because it still, like, generally prefers the genital area. HSV1 is pretty happy in both places. But what is a lot more common and a lot easier in terms of transmission is having HSV1 orally, giving your partner oral, and giving it to them that way. It's like, so some studies done have shown that like more than half of people with genital herpes are now having HSV1. I don't think that's particularly like a new phenomenon. I think they're just paying more attention now. But it's like more common that way. So I would be more concerned if I had it orally. However, still, no matter what, if you're avoiding activity during a flare-up or when you feel a flare-up coming on, you're going to do the most to protect your partner. Like, that's the most you can do. You can't really do anything about asymptomatic shedding. You can, like I said, reduce the chances by being on the daily antivirals. You can use barriers. So for oral sex, you can obviously use condoms, or you can use a dental dam, or you can cut a condom, make it into a dental dam. There's like tutorials online for how to do it. There's even latex undies. There's a company called Laurel's that makes them. So you can look into that. Personally, I don't worry about oral sex. I just don't. And if a partner of mine isn't comfortable with oral sex, then that's a deal breaker for me. Sorry. I need that. I need that shit, So what else? The last thing you could do as a safeguard is like, you don't have to go on the daily antivirals if you don't want to, or if you have reasons to avoid that. You can just do your best to live a healthy lifestyle. Like, the healthier your lifestyle, the same things you would do to prevent yourself from getting sick as to the best of your ability during like cold and flu season, the same kind of thing is going to help you keep your herpes like dormant from shedding and from flare-ups, right? So you can look into and boost your vitamin regimen, get exercise, get sleep, work in some good self-care practices like for stress. Look at your diet and like improve your diet, have a healthier, more nutritional diet. All that kind of stuff is going to help you generally keep your herpes at bay. So another long answer. I don't know if I'll be able to do all of these in an hour. Shit. But we'll try. Okay, so next question. And actually, like those first questions are like big honker questions. So what the fuck does honker mean? Why did I say that? Let me look that up right now. Honker. A person or thing that honks. or a person's nose. Anyways, maybe I meant like big hunks. Whatever. Those two questions covered a lot, so there might be follow-up questions that, I'm just going to be like, I answered that. So the next question is it okay to have unprotected sex if both partners have HSV2 down below? And if yes, is there anything more you should be aware of while being intimate? Okay, so if both of you have HSV2 below, you're good, baby. Because, like, you have the exact same strain. You're not going to give it to each other again. It's very, very, like, it's rare and next to impossible to reinfect one another in a new spot when you already have the virus, because your body has immunity to the virus. Like, you've built up the antibodies in response to the virus. It's what helps keep it dormant, what helps keep it at bay. I know some people think that they can like trigger flare-ups for each other, which isn't really like a thing. Let me see. Can two people trigger herpes flare-ups from exposure? No. Like, okay, can two people with herpes trigger each other? So in practical terms, this means that since both of you already have HSV1 and HSV2, you cannot be, quote, reinfected, nor will you cause each other to have more outbreaks. After your first or primary outbreak, future flare-ups are determined by the status of your immune system, not exposure to an infected partner. So yeah, I mean, the partner that I got my herpes from, I got it in the early stages of our relationship, and we continued dating for like 7 months, and eventually we, stopped using protection. We were living together. We were serious. We decided, it wasn't necessary for us, and we both had HSV2 below, right? So it was I never thought about it. And yeah, like you wouldn't trigger each other's flare-ups because like that quote said, it'll come up dependent on your immune system. Maybe sometimes if you like are intimate together, it can cause a lot of friction on the skin or tearing or something like that. That could trigger flare-ups for people. So like if people have had sex and then they get a flare-up after, they might be confused and thinking, oh, I got it because my partner who also has herpes triggered it for me. But it's like the sex might have triggered it. The motion in the ocean, right? But like that doesn't mean it's gonna trigger people like for you when you have sex. Like it's just like for some people it might be, if it's been a little rough, might cause some trauma to the skin and potentially trigger a flare up, but not necessarily. So you don't have, if you both have the same strain, you don't got anything to worry about. Same goes for like HSV1. If people get it in both places, like some people have HSV1 or 2 in both places, like orally and genitally, that is usually from the initial infection. So when you are initially exposed to it, let's say you engage in oral sex, then you have penetrative sex, you may have contracted the virus from that partner in both places. So let's say your male partner has genital HSV2. No, let's say your male partner has genital HSV1 and you go down on him and then you guys have unprotected sex and then you end up having an outbreak orally and genitally. So like then you got it in both like places initially. But it's rare for you to like give it to yourself in a new area later. Like sometimes you have to be careful in the first few months of having herpes of transferring it to yourself. So if you like touch a blister and then you touch your mouth, or you touch a blister on your mouth and touch your genitals, you know, you could sometimes transfer it, but that's hard to do because after the first like outbreak, you're building up those antibodies, you're building up immunity. Still, I wash my hands after I touch a flare up just in case, especially like if I'm a contact lens wearer, like I will wash my hands like well if I need to touch a flare up before putting my contacts in, because like I'm not gonna fuck with my eyes, you know. So yeah, but it's like same type, you're Gucci, okay? So don't worry about that. Okay, so next question. Is it normal to feel prodrome symptoms while working out and these strange sensations stopping after the bath? So, yes, like, okay, let's say right now I'm having, like, what I mentioned was this prodrome symptom of my right pussy cheek feeling some sensitivity, right? I actually am planning to take a bath soon. If I take a bath and it goes away, like it could just mean that I soothed it and I don't feel it anymore, or it stopped, like, because basically what's happening is my herpes virus is like waking up and it's sending signals. It's like trying to come up to the surface of the skin where it can cause a flare up, right? So I could assume that that area of my skin right now is potentially contagious. Like the virus might be present there, even though there's no blister. And so, like I said, at this stage, I would avoid a partner making contact with that area. Or I might take antivirals or just be extra cautious, use protection if I didn't plan to. And yeah, I mean, it could go away in a few minutes. It could go away in a few hours. It could go away later tonight. I don't know so much that any like external soothing like a bath or lotion would necessarily make it go away. Like if I had a bath and then I didn't feel it anymore, I'm not sure that I would assume that it stopped being an issue. Like I would still be cautious tonight. But, you know, I would more so look to things like I said, taking the antivirals or maybe taking like a immune boosting supplement or getting extra sleep tonight. And then tomorrow, if it's gone, I'm going to be like, okay, no flare up is coming, you know? So that was a good quick one. Next question is, if I have genital HSV1 only, no previous history of oral HSV1, is it 100% risk-free to give oral sex to someone else? Am I only at risk of transmission genitally? P.S. You have helped me so much. Aw, I'm really glad to hear that. So yeah, if you have genital HSV1 only and no history of oral HSV1, then you can assume you only have it genitally. And yeah, there's absolutely no risk to giving oral sex. I know like that's not what this question is asking, but a lot of people think or worry that they're contagious like everywhere, just from having it genitally, which I find interesting because like when we have it orally, they're like people aren't usually worried that they're contagious everywhere, but it's so stigmatized genitally that people treat it like, you know, like leprosy or you're contagious everywhere, like everything you could do is like a potential risk. Like that's all just pure stigma and like misinformation talking. But yeah, that's not in relation to this question. Like this is a fair question. You know, unless you've ever had a flare up orally or you've been tested, I mean, you wouldn't be able to get tested to see if you have it orally unless you had a blister there. But you have it genitally, you can assume you only have it genitally, and I wouldn't worry about anything outside of that. And for the record, like genital HSV1, although I often talk about how like type 1 and 2 are really not different. Like they're really barely different. You know, based on studies they've done and research and stuff like that, like they do say that when HSV1 is genital, it does tend to shed less and flare up less. And it can be like typically harder to transmit your genital HSV1 to a partner. But everybody's different. Some people get frequent outbreaks with genital HSV1. Some people shed more, you know, and that doesn't mean genital HSV2 is like way more contagious. Like also depends on the person, because people with HSV2 can be asymptomatic and never get flare-ups, or get rare flare-ups, or shed a lot less as well. So next question. I was diagnosed with herpes HSV1 7 months ago. My first outbreak was below and was my only outbreak since. I thought my life was over till I saw your videos on TikTok. Oh. My question is, when and how did you get over it mentally? Is it active in my body all the time? Okay, so with that last question, I'll start with that. It is not active in your body all the time. And if anything, it is not active in your body most of the time. The only time that it's active is when the virus like awakens, comes to the surface of the skin where you have it. So in your case, it would be somewhere, you know, genital, around the area where you had it, or below. And either when it's like fully flared up, or it's trying to come up and you're just like having prodrome symptoms like I'm having right now, then you could assume it's, you know, potentially contagious. But outside of those times when it's dormant, it's like sitting in the nerve branch closest to where you get your flare-up. So usually for genital herpes, it sits in your sacral, let me see this, herpes location in nerves genitally, just so I get the terminology right. So yeah, it sits in the ganglia that are adjacent to the spinal cord in the lower back. And then orally, herpes location in nerves orally. I know there's an answer for this, but I think it's the nerve cell, like it's the nerves that are in your jaw potentially. But yeah, it could also like vary, but so usually the virus is sitting, like think of it as its home. So it's like sitting in this like, you know, tangle of nerves. And then when it wakes up and gets activated, it'll travel up to the surface of the skin where in the general area where you typically have it, or that general region. And that's when it's awake. That's when it's active. But most of the time, it's not active. And like the average person maybe gets a few flare-ups a year, depending, usually less, like that or less, I would say. And shedding, like asymptomatic shedding, they say can occur between 5 and 20% of the year. And that shedding can last for days, it can last for hours, it can last for a few minutes. So it's hard to say, but the thing about asymptomatic shedding is that like it puts us all in an equal playing field, because like most of us have herpes, most of us aren't aware that we have it, most of us don't get flare-ups or outbreaks or have any symptoms, and can still be a risk to partners. So everyone's virtually a risk for everyone, potential risk for everyone. And then when and how I got over it mentally. So it was a little bit tricky for me because like I got it at the start of a relationship. That partner was like initially very supportive. Then I found out he had it as well. He didn't really want to talk about like where it came from or who. You know, it later turned out he had been like a liar and cheater for like our whole relationship. Not saying that's why he had it or why I got it. It's unknown. But I had a lot of like initial despair over getting it because I was just in a really vulnerable, precarious time in my life. I had come off like a separation. I was dating this new person. Like I felt very scared and alone and nervous, and we were long distance, me and this person. So like I felt like I was dealing with it alone. I had not long ago like moved out of the place I was living with my ex-husband, and it was just a lot, and I felt like I was being punished by the universe. I had a really, really dark few weeks, but I remember kind of like learning about it and reading about it and just hearing a little voice in my head that was like, you're going to talk about this one day, and it's just like stigma talking right now, you know? And I was like, that's crazy. I'm never going to be public about that. Like, what? And after that relationship ended, after I left that relationship, when I kind of discovered everything, I went through a whole other like period of trying to process and accept that I had it, especially because now I was going to face like dating again. But a huge, huge help through all of that was like my sensuality practice, which like some of my older videos get into that. And I definitely want to talk about it a bit more on this channel in the future. But just working so hard at like reclaiming my confidence, my power, my sensuality, my sexuality, like, you know, some simple practices I would engage in is just like dressing up for myself, like admiring myself with pictures, photos, videos, looking in the mirror, you know, becoming my best version of myself. But generally, I would say it took me like a year, but that was because most of that time I was caught up in this really awful relationship, you know, which didn't feel awful at the time, but it was awful knowing what was going on the whole time. I could sense it though. There was a lot of flags. I had a lot of anxiety, and there's so much to say about that phase of my life. I've talked about it a bit on like my TikTok channel and some of my videos on here, but yeah, everyone's timeline might look different. But I do remember in the first couple months of being single with it, when I started dating again, I was like pleasantly surprised that it wasn't as big a deal to people as I thought it would be. Like I wasn't having trouble finding partners the way I thought I would. So I hope that helps. Okay, so here's another question. If I have HSV1 genitally, do I have to worry about spreading it to partners who only have HSV1 orally? I have it both orally and genitally, and I worry about spreading it genitally to my partner who only has it orally. Also, you've helped me a million times since my diagnosis a few months ago to realize it's not the end of the world. So happy to hear that. Sending you so much love. And yeah, this is a little bit similar to what we were talking about earlier. So both of you have the same type, but you have it in different locations. My theory on this, based on what I know, is that the chance that you would give it to each other give it to your partner in a new location, which for him would be genitally, would be really difficult to do because he already has it. So he probably already has the antibodies, he has immunity, unless maybe like sometimes I guess your antibody count and immunity could like lower at times and make you susceptible. But again, it's really, really difficult it's similar to reinfecting yourself in a new area. So like if your partner who has it orally touched his oral blister and then touched his genitals, like it's kind of a similar risk in terms of like him giving it to himself. But I would still say that that's like next to impossible after having it for a long time, because the immunity and antibodies are there. So it would be the same thing for him getting it from you, right? I would definitely still just be a little bit cautious during a flare-up, like, you know, if you're exposing it to a new area. But like I was saying earlier with the person saying that they and their partner had HSV2 genitally, like, I think you're pretty good. Like, I would feel confident. I wouldn't be worried if we have the same strain, just like different places. I wanted to look this up just to corroborate or validate what I'm saying. So this quote says, "It's rare to get the same type of herpes on two different areas of the body. This means that if you have HSV1 on the mouth, it is unlikely that you will get HSV1 sores on genitals. So yeah. The fact that you guys both have the same strain is going to work in your favor. So I hope that helps. Next question is, when is it too late to take antiviral medication? That's a good question. Let's see. When is it too late? I wonder if there's like a thought on this online, because I do know, like, if you're already in the process of a flare-up, it may not do that much to make it go away. So, for example, valcyclovir works, which is Valtrex, works best if it's used within 48 hours after the first symptoms of shingles or genital herpes begin to appear. For recurrent outbreaks, it works best if it's used within 24 hours after symptoms begin to appear. Now, I think that just means like that's when it's most effective, because it can, if you take it early enough, you can prevent the flare-up from happening at all. So for example, like right now, like I was saying, I'm feeling some prodrome symptoms, right? If I took the antiviral today, I could probably prevent a flare-up from coming if one is on its way. If I waited until the blister was there, it might not be as effective in making it go away. So, but like, that's a different case, I think, if you're taking them daily, which I don't know if you are, or just kind of asking in regards to treating a flare-up. But like, in my mind, it's never too late. Like, it's always going to do its thing. It'll just be more effective at minimizing it or preventing it if you take it as early as possible. So next question is, if you're asymptomatic, can you still give birth vaginally? How will doctors be able to tell if you're having an active outbreak without symptoms so you don't transmit it to your baby? This is a good question, because like it's a more nuanced question in regards to delivering. And so basically what happens is when you tell your OBGYN or doctor that you are pregnant, that you are pregnant and have herpes, genital herpes, what they'll typically do is put you on the daily antivirals for your last trimester, or like a period of time before you're set to deliver. And that is to assure, to the best of their ability, that you won't get a flare-up during the time of birth or be shedding, right? Because remember, like I was saying, the antivirals do a huge job of reducing shedding episodes. So the likelihood that you would be shedding during birth on the daily antivirals is extremely low. And then the other thing about asymptomatic shedding is that it isn't always enough to infect anybody. Like, it means that the virus kind of comes up to the surface without causing a full flare-up. But like I said, it can last a few minutes, it can last a few hours, it can last a day and then go away. And it also varies in terms of like the viral load. So like the viral load, or the amount of virus in an active blister / flare-up is going to be highest. If you're just like having an asymptomatic shedding episode, like say right now, out of extra caution, I would avoid activity with someone down there because I can feel a prodrome symptom. So I could assume that the surface of the skin in that area might be contagious, but it also might not be. Like, there might barely be any virus there, or not enough to actually infect somebody, versus when there's a full-on blister. So the chance that it would transmit to your baby when you're having an asymptomatic shedding episode and you're also on daily antivirals, which will typically lower that a great deal, it's really, really low. So they're not really concerned about it. But if you are super worried about it, I think you can opt for a C-section. But generally, they're more worried about like checking to see if you have an active flare-up during the time of delivery. So, and there's a lot of things happening with all of that. It probably depends as well on exactly where it would be. because it might be in a spot that doesn't come into direct contact. Anyways, I hope that helps. I would definitely chat with your OB for more information because it might be something that's more specific to like your own, case and sitch with your herpes. So next question is, can you forget you have herpes until you have an outbreak? The answer to that is absolutely. I think maybe this question comes from a place I was at one day back in the day where I just thought to myself if I would ever go a day without thinking about it, thinking that I have it, thinking about what other people might think of it or how other people might react to it. And honestly, if I wasn't someone who spoke about it publicly and made content about it and sought to help other people with it, I would not be thinking about it like 90% of the time. And actually, even with how much I talk about it, I don't think about it the majority of the time. So I hope that brings you some solace, because in the first little while when you're just kind of processing it and getting over your own like internalized stigma around it, it can feel like it will never leave your mind, It might not leave our body, but it absolutely can leave our mind. Okay, next question is, I know it can still be contagious when not flared up, but do you ever experience any other constant symptom when you're not having an outbreak? Like any sort of pain or tingling in the area? So I would say, just like I mentioned, like if I'm having a prodrome symptom, like right now, I'm feeling some tingling in the area, but it's definitely not constant. I think if there's something that you're feeling all day, every day that isn't going away, then I would get it looked at, because that shouldn't be happening. Like herpes will only cause symptoms, if you do even get symptoms with your herpes, while it's shedding or, actually flared up. It sheds while it's flared up too, but you know what I mean? If you have like constant symptoms that aren't going away, it could be something else. It might feel like there's constantly something going on if you're like hyper aware. I know for a lot of us, when you initially get herpes and you're assessing your body for an outbreak, you're hyper vigilant and hyper aware of every sensation in your body that you might not have noticed before. I know what it's like because I struggle with health anxiety, and you can overemphasize like symptoms, right? Also, when you initially get herpes, maybe you might be more symptomatic for the first while. Like I had 2 flare-ups back to back the first time I got it. It took like a month for everything to just like settle. And then it was like, operating normally as it should. So maybe in the beginning you might feel more stuff or be questioning, but it shouldn't be happening all the time every day. Okay, so next question is, when showering or bathing or drying off after while having a flare-up, do you need to be careful not to touch other parts of your body with your hand or rag/towel right after touching the area with it so you don't spread it? No. My answer to that is simply no. The virus dies very, very quickly outside of your body. So even let's say like this is while you're having a flare-up, because some people are like worried about this outside of a flare-up, and I would not ever give it a second thought outside of a flare-up. So during a flare-up, when you're showering, it's very difficult for the virus to survive in water, in soap, outside of your body. Honestly, I would just like, for extra caution, if I'm literally rubbing or washing the area with like, say, my hand while it's flared up, which I wouldn't rigorously be rubbing or cleaning the area during a flare up anyway. I would probably just like rinse myself. But if I touched it, like I would just rinse my hand and not stick it in my eye or anything like that, just to be extra safe. But again, this goes back to kind of the whole thing of like, it's very, very difficult to actually spread it to yourself in another part or on another part of your body. Maybe I would worry about this in the first, like during your very first flare up, or like when you first got it. But after you've had 1 or 2 flare ups, or even just like had it for a couple months, your body starts to build up the antibodies and immunity. So it's not really a concern. And then especially when it comes to rags or towels, it will not survive or transfer through anything like that. So you don't need to worry about that. I've heard, unfortunately, a lot of people like think that it can transmit like through clothes or like bed sheets, towels, all that kind of stuff. Razors, like it's not going to happen. It's not. Especially material and fabric. Like it's going to die like almost immediately outside the body. And if you've looked it up online and you've come across some articles talking about herpes surviving on surfaces, remember that those are studies. First of all, a lot of them were done like super long ago, like in the 70s or 80s. And then it's done in a controlled environment where like the conditions are perfect. And like even if the virus can survive on a surface, it doesn't mean it can infect you from that surface, right? It has to transmit skin to skin. It has to enter the skin through an entry point, like a small tear or opening, and it has to be direct. So it's not going to happen through any like materials or sheets, and soap and water, even water alone, is going to like kill it instantly or denature it. Okay, so next question. I'm in a women loving women relationship, and I wonder what I can do to prevent my partner from HSV2. So I am, I've dated men and women, and in my experience and sort of what I do or like advise, like obviously it depends on what you and your partner are doing. But what I would advise is just similar things to any other intimate contact, right? So like, again, just avoiding activity when there's a flare up or like suspicions of a flare up coming on. That's like the most and best thing that you can do. Can't really do much once again about like asymptomatic shedding. Like the answer I was giving earlier, just in regards to like generally trying to do your best to protect a partner, like just living a healthy lifestyle, all that stuff is going to help. Antivirals can help a ton. Barriers, like again, you can use latex underwear. You can use dental dams if either of you are really worried. That's honestly all I really consider or think about when I'm with a woman. If you're doing something like using/sharing toys, I would just, wash or clean them between uses, like if you're like passing them back and forth kind of thing. But even then, it's totally up to you and your partner and your comfort levels, right? And I would obviously be more concerned if I felt like a flare-up was coming on or had a flare-up. But generally outside of that, it's just kind of like you do your best. And as long as your partner's aware and knows that there's a small risk, like they're taking that same risk with anybody else that they're with. So I feel like that's about all you can really do. You can also use barriers for the toys that you use themselves. That's also an approach. When I look it up online, they talk about like using lube and extra like lubricant just to like prevent any potential tears, because that can, create easier access. But yeah, like again, I would generally just utilize like similar advice as with any other partner. And as long as, you're as honest as you can be, and like paying attention to whether you might get a flare up or not. Like nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to be able to protect or prevent anything 100%. And remember too that like our partners pose potential risks to us too. Like any intimacy that we're engaging in poses potential risk to both parties. We get screened and all that stuff, but we're not always screened for everything. Certain things have longer incubation times. Not everyone's aware of their status all the time. So that can also help to just sort of balance things like, mentally and psychologically. Okay, next question is, does the area have an uncomfortable prickly sensation when you touch it? No, but I don't know if this is referring to like the flare-up itself or the area where I would get the flare-up, because like the flare-up itself, if I touch it, it's a lot like touching a pimple, like it kind of hurts. But it also depends on like what kind of flare up you get, because you can get a blister, you can get something that looks like a pimple or ingrown hair, you can get something that looks like a little wound, like a tear or cut, and like touching something that is like an open cut or wound can have like a sharp little pain. You know, it's like if you touched any like cut on yourself, even a paper cut, you would feel that. Generally outside of that, I would say no. So I hope that answers your question. Next question is, what's the best way you've found to tell someone that you're interested in getting intimate with about having HSV2? Is more information or less information better? I know my worth and understand it's their loss if they allow fear and stigma to get in the way, but I feel like the one time I've disclosed, I jumped into over-explain and into educating, and I'm not sure what's the better approach. So I totally get this question. What's that like soundbite? Like, oh, I love this question. I think it's from the summer I turned pretty. I think it's like a soundbite from the main character in an interview outside of the show. Anyways, irrelevant. Okay, I've wondered this and not struggled, but like I've thought about this myself, because like I love talking about it and educating about it, as you guys know. And I feel like some partners want to know a lot. Some don't necessarily need to or want to know everything. Some prefer to do research on their own. So the way I kind of go about it is like a slow breadcrumb / like reveal. So I will put it out there, like kind of similar to what I said earlier. Like I'll say, you know, just so you know, I have herpes. Like if you have any questions about it, let me know. So I'll put it out there with less information initially, right? Because if I write a whole paragraph about like what type I have, how many outbreaks I get, like how it works, it's like they're going to get a whole essay from me, and that might just exhaust somebody, like outside of even the disclosure itself, right? So I kind of just like, you know, it's like peeling away an onion. So I just kind of give them the main info first. And I usually say herpes because I don't think most people understand what HSV is or stands for. But then I just kind of let them direct or guide the conversation. So if they start asking questions, which some of them, I've had some people ask me like, okay, like how often do you get outbreaks? How does that affect, you know, how we would be intimate and stuff? It'll kind of steer you in the direction they want to go, you know? Sometimes I do drop little things, little tidbits, like it's super common, it's easy to work around. I don't know if you've been screened for it yourself. It's usually not in STI screenings. I said that to someone recently and they were like, yeah, actually, I know that it's not usually in my screenings. Like, I noticed that. And I'm like, yep. You don't know your status either. But yeah, like sometimes I'll be like, literally, I'll just be like, yeah, like it's kind of crazy because it's not in routine STI screenings. Most people don't know that they have it. I know that I have it because I get like the occasional outbreak or flare up, you know? It's funny, I've had the odd person, like I had one person a couple of years back who was asking me a lot of like very detailed questions about it, and it turned out it was because they suspected they might have had it themselves, and I was like, oh. And then I've told this story a couple times on my TikTok, I think, but I was like, you know, I can't tell you if it is, but it sounds like it, and it's probably a good idea to like go get tested for it since you've had symptoms or think you've had symptoms. And then he was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. And I was like he was like, nah, I don't think I have it. I don't think that's what it is. And I was like, unmatch. That's a red flag. Please don't be ignoring shit like that. But yeah, it also like comes down to your character and personality. Like if you're someone who naturally likes to kind of get into and share the science and statistics, like someone would be into that and feel comforted by that. It's sort of like if you just put yourself out there authentically the way that you like to talk about it, the right people are gonna meet you halfway and be like, I like that. She knows, or they know a lot about it, right? So But yeah, I've literally had the odd person be like, what is that? What is herpes? I've never heard that before. And I'm like, what? I understand not knowing a lot about it, but I'm like, I feel like it's rare for people to like have never heard about it, but I don't know. Okay, so I think this next question is from a friend of mine. um, I'm guessing, I think I know who it is. A bestie. How do you have the confidence and hotness to be a never-ending bubbly booble? That's the giveaway. I love you. So that comes back to like what I was talking about earlier, just like the sensuality piece. It's, I would say, like the biggest, most powerful resource for me. And it's something that I stumbled onto like years before I contracted herpes. Like I had gone through a miscarriage when I was still married. We miscarried. And in recovering from that, I had this like experience where I was looking at my body in the mirror. I was just sort of like reflecting on everything that me and this body just went through. And I was like overcome with this feeling of gratitude for like everything we had just endured, and I felt like I was back, and like I had been heartbroken and like depressed over it, but I also just felt like at that time I was seeing and feeling like my old self, my body coming back to normal. And I don't know, it was this really strong sensation or thought of like, I'm gonna adore and worship the fuck out of this body like for the rest of my life, like, or from this point on. And I had struggled with so much insecurity through most of my 20s. Like the book that I'm writing is gonna go a lot deeper into all of this. Like it goes into like my sensuality journey and like, things that I went through like in high school, my 20s, and the whole herpes experience as well. There's gonna be so much in there, you guys. So I won't get like too deep into it, but yeah, I was just like, I'm gonna love and worship and adore this body. And like, I think I read a book sometime after that was like talking about sensuality, and it was kind of describing exactly what came over me, because after that I started to just want to take photos of myself, take videos of myself, and like share it with the world. I reworked like my whole wardrobe. I started to like get excited about how I dressed again. Like I saw it as much more of like a art form and form of self-expression than ever before. Like I stopped caring about trends and fashion, and I was literally just like, what looks and feels best on my body and like makes me come alive, or that I gravitate towards, like what gets me excited. It's like, for example, this is just the first example that popped into my head, but I might be like, oh my God, I just like need to get my hands on a pair of leather green pants. Okay. I actually like, I still want that. I have it written in my list. I have this like list on my phone of just like clothing items that I want to buy. And one of them is a pair of green leather pants. I don't know if I saw them on somebody or if it just like came to my head. I just need to have them, There's no specific brand or anything. It's just like, I need them in green and like faux leather. And that to me is part of sensuality. It's like expressing yourself in your own unique way and everything you gravitate towards. And it ties into your physical senses, like your sense of sight and hearing and touch and taste. Like all those things that you enjoy through your senses are this like unique roadmap of who you are and like your truest self that's like trying to come out and express itself and be seen, And I feel like when I started to explore that sensuality and like post a lot of that stuff, it like made some people around me uncomfortable initially. I think people understand it a lot more now, but it was like sort of part of this process of not caring what people think anymore, not catering to what they think I should be, based on whatever social criteria they're using or their opinions of me or whatever. and just existing for myself, you know? And I think that that was such a helpful precursor to when I got herpes. And even though around the time that I got herpes in the period that I had it, like for the first year, I was in such a like difficult, isolated place in that relationship. When I came out of it, I just leaned back into all the sensuality work and healing work with it, because I had to do so much healing from the fuckery that I had just been through. Like, not even the herpes piece, you know? You guys will see in the book. Like, I went through the ringer, you know? And there was a lot of healing to be done, but it was also the most like empowering, beautiful time of my life to reclaim myself like that, to heal myself, to show up for myself, and like for the herpes piece to just fall to the background, you know? So for me, it's like sensuality and living and expressing your truest self all the fucking way. And like nobody can make you confident or they can take your confidence away actually. But like you have to conjure up and protect that confidence like your fucking most precious stone crystal like within you. You have to nurture it, and you can't let people make your confidence or break it, because if they can make it, they can also break it, right? It's kind of that whole thing like love bombing. Like if somebody can love bomb you and make you feel like, oh, like I'm loved and I'm appreciated and blah blah blah, they can take it away, and then you're left with nothing. And it's similar in dating with herpes. Like if you know your self-worth, you love yourself, you're confident about yourself, rejections that happen are not really going to sway you that much. And if somebody is down, it's also not going to sway you that much to the point where you're like, oh my God, this person is okay with it. Like I have to be with them, right? Because then you also might be settling, and like that's also connected to a low sense of self-worth, because you're going to just accept anybody that quote unquote accepts you. And you're still the prize. Okay, so the next question is, how do you talk to a potential partner about having herpes? What do you say and how do you approach the conversation? So I feel like I've talked about that one a couple times now through the other questions. So hopefully that answered your question. So yeah, I feel like we can move on to the next one, because I think we covered that at length. I'm just trying to think if there was like anything else to say about it, but I don't think so. So the next question is, can you still have unprotected sex when it's not active and have HSV2? Yes. Yes, you can. So they have done studies on transmission rates between couples, and like they studied couples who dated for years and they were intimate on a regular basis, and I think in some cases didn't use condoms and didn't use antivirals, and the rates of transmission were still low. I think in one of the studies it was like somewhere in the range of like 3 to 10% risk per year. So what's kind of wild is, I was going to make a TikTok like this. Did I do it? Maybe I just have it written down as an idea, but it kind of trips you out if you look up things that are like more risky than that. Like, so more risky than your partner getting herpes. Like things like, for example, you might be more likely to get in a car accident than acquire herpes from your partner with unprotected sex, right? So things like that can kind of help you like gauge it. And I had a partner that I disclosed to not too long ago, and he kind of was, I could see or sort of tell that he was doing his own research on the side as we were discussing it, because he was coming back with things like, oh, wow, yeah, like I just like looked that up and like the transmission rate is actually really low. Like I'm surprised by that. That's cool to hear. So it is still a low chance that you'll actually transmit it. And a huge part of that is like, you know that you have it. If you get outbreaks or flare-ups, you are able to protect your partner at the most contagious time. And even if you do, like, let me just put it out there that even if you do have sex during a flare-up unprotected, doesn't mean that your partner is going to get it. And I'm not saying like you take that risk or whatever. It's between you and your partner, but it isn't this like one-stop shop. Viruses just don't work like that. Like they might just be, having a good immune system day and nothing can penetrate. Like there's different reasons. It's like, we've all had times where like we were around someone who was sick or someone who had COVID and we didn't get it, right? Like and people have this perception or idea that like as soon as you sleep with someone who has herpes, you're going to get it or you're signing up to get it, when in actuality, like you are risking getting it with like anyone that you sleep with ever. So yeah, you can absolutely have unprotected sex especially when it's not active. And, as long as you and your partner have discussed it, they consent, like they know the risk, then you guys can do whatever you like, Okay, so next question, does herpes, HSV1, stay in your body forever when it's not active? So yes, whether it's type 1 or 2, it stays in your body for your whole life, okay? But it's not active for most of that time, like I was saying earlier. And there's other herpes viruses that act the same way. So herpes is like a whole family of viruses. There's actually like hundreds of herpes viruses, but the common ones that we know and talk about, there's like 8 strains. So one of them is mono, one of them is shingles / chickenpox. When we initially get it as kids, it's chickenpox. Later, it can come up as shingles. Those also stay in your body forever. So like the chance that any human being has at least one virus in their system that's just sitting there for their whole life, like quietly, is like pretty high. So, and literally the majority of us have HSV1, whether we get flare-ups or not. So most of us are carrying that for forever, So I wouldn't worry too much about that fact. I think we get scared and like hung up on the fact that it's in our body forever, but it's sweeping most of the time. It's sleeping. It's just like sleeping, not doing anything. And then sometimes it wakes up, Do you still or can you give oral sex or kiss having this condition? Also, can they contract it? And what's your dating experience been like so far? In brackets, I'm new. So hopefully some of your questions have been answered previously or already, but you can absolutely perform oral and kiss. So like I said, it's only contagious in the area that you have it while it's shedding or flared up. And, we talked about transmission rates and risks. My dating experience so far has been that the majority, like I would say like 90%, maybe 95%, 90% have like not had an issue with it or been scared off by it. It hasn't gotten in the way of my dating life. Like I've still been able to do and enjoy all the things that I want to do, whether I want something casual and whether I want to like expand my horizons and experiment a little with more people, for example, or whether I want to date for love and relationships. Like it has not changed anything in that regard. All right, so the next question we have is there still hope for a love life anymore? So I feel like I just answered that, and hopefully like everything I've said so far has answered that, because absolutely, like there is no reason that someone shouldn't love you just because you have a virus that most people have and that they could likely have. And even if it was rare and hard to get and scary, like that shouldn't affect somebody loving you. Like there's so much more to you than this, so much more. And like I think that if you are someone who's really struggling with the idea that anyone would date or love you, that is a call to like really, really hone in on and work on your self-love. Like that is like the most important thing. It has to be there. It has to be intact for you to invite anyone else to love you. Because if you are going to enter a relationship or situation having no love for yourself, it's not going to go well. There's going to be like codependency there. You're going to be relying on someone to make you feel valuable in this world, and you don't want that. So as hard as it is, because I know we often want the solution to be that someone's just going to swoop in and like love us and tell us that everything is going to be okay. And sometimes they do. We really need to do that for ourselves first. So yes, there's hope. I wouldn't even say there's hope because there's no reason for there not to be hope. You can have the same love life you always had and better, you know? Like I've been single since I got it, right? Apart from like being in the relationship I was in when I got it. Once I left that relationship, it's been like 5 years now of me being single, and you know, I've had some not so great, but also really, really great like dating experiences of all kinds, and I've caught feelings, and I've like almost fallen in love. Guys, I haven't deeply fallen in love yet in 5 years. That's harder to come by. You know, love is harder to come by, but I was also like, my heart was closed for a long time. Like I haven't really been open to a relationship since earlier this year. So that was more to do with other things that I think are way more concerning than herpes, is like people lying and cheating and being deceitful and not who they say they are. So next question is there anything I'm not supposed to do during sex, like getting eaten out? Nope. Do it all, baby. You're good. Do it all. Next question is, do you ever get paper cut breakouts? I only have one slice cut outbreak that used to be rare, but now I'm getting them every 2 weeks and wondering if there's any information or knowledge behind knife cut herpes or why it happens in some people. So that is such a good question. Like in terms of why some of the breakouts look a certain way versus others and other people, like I want to look into the science behind that, or if there is a science behind that. But I will tell you, I have had like flare-ups look various ways. Like I've had the type that is just like one bump. I've had a type that just looks like an open cut. I've had the type that looks like a cluster of tiny little bumps. They call it like a cauliflower kind of look. So I don't think it's like specific to, you know, like that's the kind you're always going to get and it being more frequent because you get that type or anything like that. It's just how it's like presenting on your skin at that particular time or during that particular flare up. So the frequency of outbreaks is something that, like, if you're getting them every 2 weeks, then I would maybe look into why. Like, I don't know if you just got it or you've had it for a long time, because it can be more frequent when you first get it. But like, if it's happening that often, then you can look into reasons why. Like maybe it's something with your diet, maybe there's some other trigger going on. You know, you may, if you're not on them, want to consider the daily antivirals to suppress it a bit, just so you don't have to deal with that, or like other ways of treating and suppressing it, like, you know, upping your vitamin regimen. Like L-lysine is something that can often help. There's different like vitamins that you know, nutritionists can recommend, like for herpes, to help keep it dormant. Don't listen to any of like these like bots talking about like curing herpes with like certain medicines and stuff. Like that stuff is not true, because it cannot leave your body or system, and you're not going to cure it. At most, you will help it go and stay dormant for as long as possible. So I also wanted to look it up just for some extra info, and I don't know how much like fact or truth there is to this, but someone was saying that there can be a strong tendency, if you have your herpes manifest a certain way, for it to like reproduce that in future outbreaks. So maybe sometimes it's that your body is, or the virus is coming up a certain way for you on your body, and like it's just easier for the virus to like replicate that and do that for subsequent outbreaks. it's kind of silly, but it almost makes me think like that our viruses might just have a certain look or style to them. And they're like, yeah, like I'm just going to keep this style because it works instead of like reinventing myself. So like if paper cut blisters my thing, I'm going to keep showing up like that for this one, you know? But it can also switch around because it can move, like shift places too. Like I get my flare up, which is usually like one bump, right? I can get it like on my outer labia, I can get it on my inner labia, I can get it near my like anus, I can get it on my butt, like top of my butt crack is a common spot. I used to confuse that one and not be sure if it was like an outbreak or not because I thought that I was just like wiping too hard or like spreading my butt cheeks or something and like ripping it like. So it can also move spots a little bit, so that can, you know, so she can be fickle or she can be consistent. But for the frequency of outbreaks, I would look into that just to make it easier on yourself. So next question is, have you infected someone since you discovered that you have it? Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. So it's been like 5 years and I don't know of anyone that I have given it to, at least that's come back to me and said that they, you know, had symptoms and contracted it. I'm usually very, very diligent about using protection for many reasons. So I think that tends to help. And then I'm like off and on antivirals. Like sometimes I'm on them daily, sometimes I'm not. Lately for the last like while I have not been on them, but I have no issue with being on them. I just go off them sometimes for a while to see how often I might get outbreaks without them. If I already have HSV2 down below and she doesn't, will I risk spreading it to my mouth if mid-intercourse I take a quick trip down south for a snack? Ooh, we like that. I like that. Yeah, so I kind of touched on this earlier. Giving it to yourself again in a new location would be really, really hard, given that you already have it, you have immunity to it, especially through like a second removed source. Like you're saying, it would be like you having intercourse or like penetrating and then eating her out. So it's like assuming that your virus would end up on her and then you would be going down on her and it would go to your mouth. Like that's not going to happen. Like it won't transfer through multiple sources like that. Some people have thought that like they got it from, you know, like if they lick their finger or like lubricate their finger with their saliva while having like an oral outbreak and then touch their partner's genitals, that they gave it to them that way. That I could maybe see, but that's like a first entry, first point of contact, like initial infection, right? And like if you have an open, like if you have a cold sore that's there and it's the virus is like mixing into the saliva and you know, like wet your finger and put it down there like on the other partner, there's a small chance it could transfer that way. But even then, that's pretty rare. Like it would really have to be direct contact. So that person with oral herpes going down on their partner while they're contagious. And again, it needs like friction. It needs a little tear. It needs an entry point. So it's really not easy to transfer like through something like a hand, or especially in the case of this question, like having intercourse and then going down on someone after and that virus being there. And then on top of it, the fact that you already have it, like you wouldn't, it's like impossible that you would reinfect yourself on your mouth that way. So I hope that helps. Would you be open to a long distance relationship? That's funny. I don't know who asked this, but I'm not looking actually at who asked these questions. I just have a list of them right now. So I don't know if this was like a proposition or just a query, but I probably wouldn't, honestly, because of my experience with my long distance relationship that I had through this whole saga of contracting my herpes. So not even to do with the herpes, but it's tough. It's tough. However, if like you're really in love, you trust somebody, or you have an arrangement, you're both comfortable and happy, like you're not expecting each other to be committed or exclusive, maybe. But the hardest thing, the biggest struggle I had with long distance relationships was just like constantly yearning for that person and not being able to have them around. Like that was hard. Like not having access and having to wait for visits and not being able to do visits very often. Like that's the hard piece with it. Is there a link? But hey, anyone that's able to carry on a successful long distance relationship or end up together, like fuck yeah. That's the other piece for me, is like I don't think I would relocate ever again. And then someone relocating for me would be a big deal. It would have to be pretty serious for that. But you know, I went to another country and I got burned by doing that, so I'm a little put off by that now. Is there a link between herpes and cervical cancer? I read this the other day and it made me mind blown emoji. I'm not sure where you might have read that, but there is not. They used to confuse way back in the day herpes with HPV, and then they figured out that it was two separate things, or that they had been confusing them. So people often mistake HPV and herpes. Maybe because the acronyms are similar, like HSV and HPV, but HPV is what some strains of HPV can potentially pose a risk and cause cervical cancer. That's why you get pap smears, or I don't know that they do them annually. It depends on where you are, but they'll do pap tests to screen for abnormal cells, and that's a way that they can look for any potential signs of very, very like potential precursor to cervical cancer. That's why those screenings are so incredibly helpful and important, because if they catch it before it like becomes problematic, becomes cancer, they can remove it, and it's like highly preventative, right? But no, herpes does not have a link to cervical cancer at all. Okay, so I was just looking up like where this could have come up online, and there was a study done that said that they found incidences of HSV2 in women who had cervical cancer. But the thing is, like, there's no real correlation with that, because that could just mean that like a lot, like 1 in 5 women have HSV2, like statistically. So just because like they happened to also have HSV2 doesn't mean that there's any connection between HSV2 and their HPV/cervical cancer, or, you know, what was now cervical cancer. And there's another study that I found, and it kind of explains what I was talking about. So it says that since the end of the 1960s, herpes simplex virus type 2 had been considered a cause of invasive cervical carcinoma, cervical cancer. But another study basically, together with inconsistent detection of HSV2 DNA and consistent identification of HPV DNA and cervical carcinoma, revised this paradigm in the early 80s. So they were mistakenly connecting the two, and then they realized they were wrong in the 80s. So some sources that you might find are like citing this very, very old information. Okay, and then this same study stated that HSV2 was not associated with any excess risk of invasive cervical carcinoma, which is cervical cancer. So, yep, we're good on that. Okay, next question. Would you move to Scotland and marry me? Very flattered. I appreciate it. But that's gonna have to be a no. How does a 31-year-old male with HSV navigate the dating scene, particularly with other girls that also have HSV? Some girls make sex a big deal and shy away from the topic, while others aren't shy at all and are still willing to have intimate moments with me. I'm not sure. It sounds like you're only dating women who also have HSV. 31-year-old male, particularly with other girls that also have HSV. Some girls make sex a big deal and shy away from that topic. I mean, I'm not sure what kind of conversations you're having, depending on, I guess, if you guys have different strains, but if you both have HSV and have the same strain, then like there isn't really anything to worry about there. Even if you have different strains, like there's some protection against the others. Or if they're internalizing and perpetuating stigma around something both they and you have, then it sounds like, you know, they need to do some self-work around that. But I would like branch out of dating only other people who have herpes, because you don't need to limit yourself that way. And sometimes I feel like it can be a little bit of a, I don't know, like I stay away from those, like the apps, like the app that, you know, I think it's Positive Singles. They reach out to me constantly to be like a advocate or sponsor, or to sponsor me. And like, I've stayed away from that app since the beginning, because I don't like the way that they take advantage of and monetize the vulnerability of having herpes and feeling like ostracized from the dating world because of it, and kind of being made to feel like you should and can only date other people with herpes. I absolutely understand if it is a comfort to some people to just not have to worry about it, not have to disclose, and deal with and connect with people who understand and like have the same thing. I would just be cautious that you could be signing on to people that are in varying stages of like dealing with their status, right? Like if you come across somebody who's having a very difficult time with it, like it can just introduce a lot of extra difficult layers to the relationship. Sometimes people can attach or bond, you know, on that basis and sort of put up with each other or settle for each other simply because they both have it. I certainly, like, I was definitely still deeply in love with the partner I got it from, but like, I know that there was a part in the back of my mind that was kind of like, ugh, like, I can't start over. I can't like face dating with this on my own, you know? And it held me back a little bit. So I would just step outside of that bubble, you know? There's no need to stay in a circle of like only people who who also have it. And if somebody is shying away from having, you know, intimate moments with you and intimacy with you, then there might be other reasons for that, other things going on, but then, you know, they're simply not for you. Okay, I have questions, but not sure where to begin. I'm hoping you provide an opportunity again in the future for those of us who might still have questions after we watch the YouTube video. Absolutely. Like, I think I would probably do another Q&A or more Q&As like this in the future, because they're nice, you know? And this one's going to be fucking long. So hopefully I'm going to cover a lot and be able to help a lot of people with these questions. How will a doctor know if you're able to give birth vaginally if you have asymptomatic genital herpes? So there was a question almost exactly like this earlier. So I'm going to skip over that one. How can I properly disclose to men? I never know what to say that doesn't fill me with shame. I just want to sound educational and sexy. Ooh, I cannot shake this feeling of getting this virus and feeling like I'm sick and disgusting. I'm sorry. So that to me would come back to that self-love, that work on getting your confidence back, getting your groove, your vibe back. There's so many ways that you can go about that. Definitely like the sensuality piece and practices that I was talking about, or like even simple things like reconnecting with the things that make you you and make you proud to be you, like any hobbies that you have or goals, or like things that, I don't know, that like skills that you have, things that just like make you feel good and boost your confidence. Like something you can also do is like ask friends and loved ones around you to send you a list of like 5 things that they love about you. You could even include like some of them being physical attributes, so that like your confidence is just fucking boosted all the way around, you know, because there is no reason that you should ever feel like you're sick and disgusting. And that is stigma talking, right? So for that, you sound like you're on the right track because you're in this space, but like I would keep looking at people who inspire you, who don't feel this way, who don't talk about themselves this way, who inspire you to not think this way. Learning about the stigma around this too, there's a lot of really good articles on Vice. If you guys search like herpes Vice, I don't know if they're Vice magazine or just Vice, but they've written some really beautiful articles like destigmatizing herpes. Like search and watch like some interviews with people talking about it on podcasts and different like formats. Like, you know, it makes you feel so much better to realize there's so many badass people out there who have it and talk about it. And like, just know that most people don't talk publicly about it. So it makes it feel like you're alone with this, but you're so not. Like, think about the celebrity world. The majority of the celebrities like also have this because they're also human. Statistically, they're going to fall into the same statistics. So I hope that can help. And like sounding educational and sexy, that's going to come naturally with the confidence that you gain. And then you're going to like find your flow with how to talk about it, how to disclose it. And something that you can do is just like practice, you know? Like there were times earlier on in my journey where I would just match with a bunch of people and just like practice disclosing with all of them. Like even if it was like very soon in the conversation, just to like work out how I wanted to say it, how I wanted to talk about it. The stakes were low because these weren't necessarily people that I was going to move forward with or date. And it was just to kind of like assess for myself how they'd react or, you know, and like you don't want, like I was saying earlier, you don't want anyone's reaction to like make or break your confidence, but you can do this kind of like survey of like various people and just see how different people react, you know? And if you're nervous about it, you could even set your location to a different city. Like someone has told me about doing that before, and I think it's so smart. You could set your location to a different city and like then try it out with people that you don't know. And you never know, you might connect with somebody that you didn't expect and end up in a long distance relationship yourself, like we were talking about earlier. So, but yeah, literally what I say is just like, hey, so like what I think I said this earlier, but I'm like, I usually will write like, I just like to tell partners, no, sometimes if it's early on, I'll be like, I just like to tell partners early on that I have herpes. Let me know if you have any questions about that. I'm an open book. Or I'll just be like, hey, so just to let you know, I have herpes. How do you feel about that? Do you have any questions? Like I just, short and sweet is how I do it. And I think for me, for my style, that feels educational and sexy. And I bring out more of the sexy education as they ask questions. Is hooking up over when you find out you have herpes? Fuck no. Fuck no. Like I said, you can engage in any kind of activity, dating activity that you want. It doesn't change anything. Just, I think what's always a helpful comparison is like looking at people who have herpes orally, who get cold sores. A lot of them are like, people are still in denial that they have herpes when they get cold sores. And like, even people who are aware are usually not even close to thinking that their dating life is over in any way, shape, or form because they have it orally. Like, and you know, in my opinion, they should be disclosing the same way because they can pose a risk to their partners for genital transmission as well. A lot of people who have it orally aren't even disclosing it because they're not told to because of this like double standard and stigma. So they don't think their life is over. They don't think hooking up is over. So why should you, you know? I'm a 14-year-old girl who has never had intercourse. Recently, a pimple-looking thing appeared on my vulva. I don't understand how if I'm not sexually active. My dad is HSV1 from when he was a young kid, but I don't think he passed it to me. So I'm going to be careful with this one because of your age. I hope I can. I'm not sure how much I can say, but I would. So the first thing I would say is like, you wouldn't get it below unless anyone made contact with that area with you, whether with their mouth or anything else where it exists. So if you're thinking that your parent transmitted it to you just from like giving you a kiss on your face, it won't work that way, because it has to be skin to skin with the direct spot that you have it. So I hope that helps. And if you are nervous about it, if there's someone that you can trust in your family who you can talk to and like get it checked out, then they can always do a swab to see, but it's probably most likely just a pimple. So like it can, freak us out because it can look like a lot of other things, but like we do get random pimples and ingrown hairs and all kinds of things there. So I think especially never having had intercourse, it doesn't seem like it's not possible that you would have that there. So if you had it on your mouth, then I would say yes, like you could have gotten it from kissing your parent who has it orally. That's often how we get it as kids and growing up, and even just from like adult relationships, like from kissing other people who have it orally, we can get it orally. So I hope that helps. Okay, next question is, I had unprotected sex with a guy and 3 days later he told me he had herpes. He was 58 and has had it since he was 15. So he knows when he's getting a flare-up, which he says is rare. Sex lasted 5 minutes. Ugh. He has had 3 kids since contracting it. None of the moms ever contracted it. I know you're not a doctor, but I'm freaking out. I'm so mad that he didn't tell me before or grab a condom, but is there a good chance I may not have contracted it? I haven't slept with anyone since, and I haven't had any bumps or anything show up. It's been 5 days so far since the act. Okay, well, first off, I'm really sorry that you experienced that, because he absolutely should have told you before engaging in any intimacy with him. And like, it definitely helps that I'm glad that he did tell you at least afterwards, but it sucks that he didn't tell you before, because you should have known that or been told that so that you could consent. So you have every right to be, upset and disappointed about that. Now, if he has had it for such a long time, like 15, if he's 58 and has had it since he was 15, that's a long, long, long time. So I would say the risk is extremely low, very, very low, because the longer your body has had it, usually the less frequent outbreaks are, the less frequent shedding episodes are. And if he has flare-ups super, super rarely, then I can understand why he feels it's really low risk. Obviously, he should still have informed you, because he has, that's his status. He needs to communicate that. But I would feel pretty confident that the risk is extremely low. It's possible that his other partners have it asymptomatically unless they got tested and have never tested positive that way. It's tricky because they won't usually test you without symptoms. If you are worried, you can wait a few months and go ask for a blood test for it. Although it is tricky with that because, you could have had it before and not known. Sometimes it can be hard to trace it back to where and when you got it if you test without symptoms. But often symptoms will show up within a couple days to a couple weeks after. So I feel like in your case, I wouldn't really be worried. Like, it sounds like the risk is very, very low. But yeah, hope it's all good, and don't love that he didn't disclose it to you. But he has had it for a very, very long time. So the risk is, I would say, pretty damn low. All right, we are getting close to the end here. So last few questions. I was recently diagnosed at 22. My partner had cold sores and didn't realize he could give it to me orally. I didn't even know he got them. I'm lost and have so many questions. Every bump that pops up on my body, I freak out about. Do you get outbreaks on any other parts of your body besides genitally? How do you tell if the bumps are just normal bumps or if it's herpes? Okay, so it won't generally pop up anywhere on your body. Like if you contract it somewhere else, like some people get it on a random body part, like maybe on their like thigh or their arm. That's either because they contracted it there or they contracted it, let's say, genitally, but it pops up on their thigh for some reason. That's a pretty rare case. Usually it'll pop up where you contracted it. So if you were worried about him going down on you and transmitting it to you below, then it would likely pop up below. It can be a little bit tough to differentiate it from other bumps, but usually, like if you do have an initial outbreak, the initial outbreak can be quite obvious, not for everybody, but you might get like a few blisters. They might look like cuts that don't heal. And if you ever see anything that you are worried about, like I would just go ask for a swab at a clinic or doctor's office. But like, you know, usually they'll need a blister with fluid to swab, or like if it's an open cut or whatever, they'll kind of dig into that. But if it's just like a bump that never breaks open, then I wouldn't necessarily assume that that's herpes. Like sometimes my recurring flare-ups are just like a bump, but I think it eventually breaks. Like it's a blister that opens, or it's a wound from the beginning, like a little cut or tear. I don't know that it stays as like a closed bump that never opens kind of thing, if that makes sense for me. But yeah, like it is tough because most of us have oral HSV1, whether we get actual flare-ups in the form of cold sores or what we call cold sores or not. And we aren't really told that, you know, we can transmit it to someone below. Like, unfortunately, because of the stigma, we're just not taught that. But so I don't fully like blame your partner. I know you don't seem to either, but it does sound like you're very worried. And I hope that some of that anxiety has gone down. As long as he avoids going down on you, when he ever feels a cold sore coming on or has one, he's going to do the most that he can to protect you. Like the odd time that there might be some asymptomatic shedding, like I've been saying, we can't really do much about that, but you're taking that risk with virtually everybody. So because like 2 in 3 people have it orally, right? So it won't really make a difference. But if you're super, super worried, you guys can look into using a dental dam. But yeah, I hope that you are doing better and feeling good and in the clear. But like I said, if you're really concerned, you could wait a few months and go ask for a blood test. But chances are like you would already have HSV1 because like I said, almost everybody does. It's kind of just a matter of who is prone to flare-ups or not. Next question is, I was diagnosed 7 months ago, so I started taking antiretrovirals, I think you mean antivirals, for 6 months on my doctor's recommendation. Now every week I feel like I'm about to have an outbreak, but it doesn't fully happen. Is that normal? It's hard to say because you've been taking them for almost the whole time that you've had herpes. So I wonder without it how often a flare-up would come up, and what it sounds like is the antivirals might be suppressing the flare-ups that are trying to come up that would maybe come up if you weren't on them. And if you are getting them that frequently, or they're trying to come up that frequently, then you can look into like what it is that might be triggering them. And it might be anything from stress to diet to nutrition to lack of sleep, to hormones. Like there could be all kinds of things that trigger it to come up often. And also, like I was saying a couple times earlier, in the first while of having herpes, we can flare up more often as our body kind of starts to get used to it. So I think it's something that you can definitely look into to see if there's any other solutions. Sometimes it means that you might need a stronger like prescription of the antiviral. For some people, they need a slightly higher dose. Or it could just be a waiting game of waiting for it to kind of work itself out. But yeah. Okay, so can you talk about if you've come across people who have experienced increased outbreaks with vaping? I've been vaping for a few months now, and I swear to God, it causes multiple flares. Ooh. I personally have not really come across vaping as an increased factor. However, smoking can be an increased factor, just like drinking excessive alcohol. So I wouldn't be surprised if vaping was a contributor as well, because it's essentially the same thing, just like a different, tool, whatever. Like, it's still the same idea. Let me actually look this up quickly. Yeah, so there is some talk online of people suspecting or researching whether smoking and vaping can contribute to more outbreaks. Those things can suppress our immune system. And what I would do is, I know it's like easier said than done, but I would try to quit and see if like it helps you, if it helps reduce the frequency of outbreaks and changes things for you or not. So I found one article discussing this and saying that basically vapes are no different than traditional cigarette smoking in the sense that the intake of toxins can potentially create a flare-up or worsen a flare-up. The presence of nicotine is often worse than no nicotine. However, vaping still involves many cold sore triggers. The biggest issue related to fever blisters with non-nicotine vaping is the overall heat an e-cig requires. Most e-cigarettes are plastic or metal and become warm or hot during continued use. Constant heat or temperature change applied to the lips can reduce their overall health and open the door for developing a cold sore. But that's like, we're talking like oral herpes. So, and I'm not sure about the science about the heat. But it's interesting, there isn't a lot of studies or information on this. But basically, anything that can, affect your immune system temporarily even. Sometimes it's even excessive sun, when you get like sunburn or like you've been in the sun too long. Anything that can slightly depress your immune system. That's why, like, again, drinking, not for everybody and not always, but sometimes drinking can depress your immune system, just like you can get sick after. You can also get a flare-up after. So I think, like, don't quote me on it, but I think it would make sense to me that potentially smoking or vaping can depress your immune system and also affect that. But everybody's also different, so it's hard to say. And guys, we are down to the last question, and I think we can even wrap this up before the 2-hour mark. Give you a nice, clean 2-hour episode. Can you do a video or explain to me if people can still partake in oral if both partners have HSV2? Okay, perfect. We already answered that one, because yeah, absolutely can. So I hope that helped you guys. It was fun to go through these questions. 43 questions that we answered. Oh, you know what? There's actually a separate question that somebody asked that I might be able to throw in here. How do I know when viral shedding is coming up? What are really good meals to eat for herpes outbreaks to prevent passing on to a partner or just having them in general? What are your tips to be more confident in myself and in my herpes, if that makes sense? Oh, hi, I know who you are. Love you too. So yeah, the confidence piece, I think I answered. Viral shedding, I think I answered. Like, just kind of getting used to and familiar with your prodrome symptoms will help you have more awareness around when you might be shedding. Like I said, I'm feeling that right now, like on my right side of my lip, down there. So I feel like I'm shedding right now, or there's a high likelihood that I am. But sometimes we're not going to feel it if it's asymptomatic, so that can be a little bit tricky. But there are ways to adjust your diet to, help keep your herpes, I was going to say keep your herpes happy, but technically it would keep your body happy and your herpes unhappy. The diet piece is kind of, it's different for everybody, and like specific meals and stuff. I'm not so much on like the nutrition side of things, or knowledgeable on the nutrition side of things. Like I would defer to a dietitian or nutritionist or expert about that. But to me, it kind of comes down to a lot of the same general advice that we see coming up again and again. Like there's so much varying information out there about the best way and healthiest way to eat, but you kind of see the same repetitive things come up that have never been challenged, or well, to my knowledge, have never been, like, no one's ever said vegetables weren't healthy for you. Have they? I hope not. Maybe. But it's like greens, fiber, like vegetables, proteins, fats, like a good mix of all of that. Whole foods, like you can't go wrong. I always, for myself, I feel healthiest when I'm eating a lot of like greens and vegetables and fruits and like grains and legumes and like some complete proteins. Like I do tofu, I do a bit of salmon. But when I'm starting to eat a lot more processed food, and a lot less fiber and, like fresh, proper vegetables, that's when I start to feel run down and just like not great. So, and like fermented foods are really good. Anything that kind of boosts your gut health, because like your immune system rests a lot on your gut bacteria. So even things like eating foods that are rich in like probiotics can be good, and even taking probiotics. But because our diets are all so specific to like our own nature and composition, I personally would always like refer people to, or advise people to talk to an expert, because like they can look at and sort of pick apart like what you could be improving with your diet, or what might be contributing. I know there's like this whole talk of sort of high arginine foods versus lysine. I don't know for certain how much of an impact that has. I mean, we could take lysine as a supplement to offset any high amounts of arginine that we consume. Like, but personally, like I don't avoid peanut butter. I don't avoid things that are high in arginine. It's also an essential amino acid that we need. So, but you can look at like sometimes, like I came up on this recently, like some protein powders have arginine added to them. So you can always check that. But yeah, eating for the win, eating healthy, it's a whole other topic on its own, right? So we are about to hit the 2-hour mark, you guys, and I can't believe I've answered every question in almost one sitting. It was like 2 sittings, but in the same day. And I really hope it helped. And I love you guys very much. And hopefully I can do a part 2 to this sometime. Always happy to answer questions. I also answer a ton of them on my TikTok and Instagram. I just kind of repost what I post on TikTok to Instagram. Not always, but yeah. I'm so done talking right now. So I'm going to go. Oh, and someone said they heard I do mini therapy sessions. Yes, I do one-on-one support calls if you need. So the link for all of that is in my bio. And one-on-one sessions as well, like longer ones, exploring your sensualities and confidence and acceptance around herpes. So we are now at 2 hours. I love you guys. Bye, herpes hotties.